So this is an image captured with my Astro Modified Sony a7 IV, captured with the Sony 14mm at f2.2, and it's a 3-minute exposure. I then put the astronomic 12nm hydrogen alpha filter in front of the sensor and behind the lens and captured a hydrogen alpha image. And hydrogen alpha is a deep red light, so your images come out, deep red. And so the idea is I'm going to blend these two together to eventually get this image here where you can see the hydrogen alpha much better. First thing you have to do is kind of make the exposure. So the hydrogen alpha filter exposure, I did 5 minutes. And even still, when I brighten it, it's still super noisy. There's a shit ton of hot pixels. And we don't need it in red. We actually need it in black and white because we just want the luminance data in there. So yeah, you can see even with a 5-minute exposure at f2.2, it's still super noisy. So I think in future, maybe I'll shoot at f1.8. And I'm not sure the best settings, maybe like 3-minute exposures and stacking 5 or 6 or maybe 8. But then it's a very time consuming shooting process, and there were many images I wanted to take that night, so I just did a single exposure at 5 minutes, and as you can see, it's super noisy. So you could use Lightroom's noise reduction, and you have to be really extreme, and you end up with loads of artifacts from the hot pixels and the pepper noise, but kind of have to work with it. But what I've actually did is used DxO Pure Raw. DxO Pure Raw is a plugin for Lightroom. You come down here, plugin extras, process with DxO Pure Raw 2. I think it costs like £100 or $100, but it's absolutely amazing. And I use DxO Pure Raw on this exposure and also on the hydrogen alpha exposure. And you can see it's a lot cleaner than just using Lightroom. It's still not the best, but it's still just about does the job and doesn't add much noise back into the image when we blend them later on. So I've now got these two exposures that have come out of DxO Pure Raw. And the idea is that the overall exposure value of the two images needs to be roughly the same. So they need to be the same kind of brightness. And so I've been brightening the H-alpha exposure using the exposure, and I brought the highlights and the whites down a little bit as well, because what I was trying to do is make this histogram look the same as the histogram for my other image. So if you look at the histograms there, you can see now they're very similar. So the overall exposure value is pretty equal. And then you take these two images. So I'm going to select them both, edit in, and just edit in Photoshop 2022. So the idea is I want to get this hydrogen alpha data into the red channel of this image. So I've got my channels panel here. If you can't see that, just go to window and make sure channels is ticked. And this is the red channel. This is all the data in the red channel for my colored image. So with that channel selected, I'm just going to press Command A or Control A if you're on Windows. Command C to copy, and then I'm going to come over to my hydrogen alpha image, make sure I'm in the layers panel, create a new layer by pressing this little button here, and then Control or Command V to paste in the red channel. So I can just rename that red. I can unlock my background, change that to H alpha. I'm going to put the H alpha on top. I'm going to duplicate the red layer just so I've got a copy of the original. So I'm going to name that red original. And we need to align the H alpha and the red channels. You can see they're just kind of out of line with one another. So you select both of these, but before I do that, I'm going to lock the red channels into position. So choose this little lock button here, lock all. You can see they're now locked. And so they shouldn't, you can't reposition them. You can't adjust them. Oh, that's the H alpha layer. You can't position them. You can't move them about. And it kind of locks them into position so they don't accidentally move. The problem is, as you'll see shortly, Photoshop's auto align still kind of moves them a little bit. And we have to make sure that the the blend is in the exact same position as the original red channel. So I'm just going to select these two, come to Edit, Auto Align Layers, and it's all pretty much automatic. And I'm going to do OK. So now you can see the H alpha and the red channel are pretty much aligned. The edges of the frame are a bit dodgy, but I'm mainly interested in this data in the Milky Way here. So they're kind of aligned. And if I turn both of these layers off, you can kind of see that the crop has moved. So if I tried to put this back into the red channel, it would be out of line. So I'm going to fix this crop. So I'm going to come into the crop tool. I'm going to put 3:2 because my image was shot as a 3:2, just so I maintain the overall aspect ratio just in case. And I'm going to come up to the corner here and crop it in. And then check the other corner and crop that in. Just check it's on the edge. Okay, and I'm going to tick that box and zoom back out. Now I'm just going to double check that I haven't accidentally cropped any pixels. So I'm going to go to image size 7008 by 4672. I'm going to check my original image size 7008 4672. So I haven't accidentally cropped any pixels off. And if I come back now, you can see everything's nice and lined up. So the H alpha is looking considerably darker than my red copy. So I'm going to create a brightness contrast layer. And I want to clip this layer to the H alpha layer. What clipping does, you basically hold Option or Alt on a Windows PC. And then when you put the mouse on the line between these two layers, you see this little arrow here. And now you see a little arrow there. That means that this layer, this adjustment layer, the brightness contrast layer, is clipped to this hydrogen alpha layer. So it only adjusts this hydrogen alpha layer. It doesn't affect any of the other layers underneath. So only affecting the H alpha. And I'm just going to increase the brightness of the H alpha layer so that it's a little bit more the same as the red copy underneath. And I'm going to select both of those layers, press Control or Command G to create a group. And what I can do now is reduce the opacity of that H alpha layer because it's a bit strong at the moment. I just want a little bit of that extra H alpha data. So that looks pretty good. But there's one big issue. If you look here, look, the stars are just not lining up with one another. It's not a perfect alignment, especially on the edges of the frame. And so if I tried to put that back into the image, you'd have really funky colored halos on the stars. So there's a little trick that I've been doing with another plugin called Star Exterminator. So I've got my H alpha image here. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bring this back to 100% so we can see what's going on. Turn off these ones. So I've got my H alpha layer selected. I'm going to come to Filter, RC Astro, and Star Exterminator. And I'm just going to let that do its thing. And that basically removes all of the stars from that H alpha. And so when I put the data back into the red channel, it's not going to mess up the original stars. And there's the result. So it's got rid of most of the stars. It struggled with these ones here on the edge of the frame, but we can fix that shortly. And just a heads up, I should have done the star reduction or the star removal process before messing about with brightness, contrast, and all that, but it's not a big issue. It's worked out quite fine. So now I'm going to come back. I've got my group here, which is my H alpha. And I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this just so that we're not getting all of the H alpha. We want it to blend with the original red channel data. So that's looking pretty good. Maybe bring it down a little bit. I don't want to darken the image too much because that will affect the colors when we put the data back in. So now we've still got this issue where stars on the edge of the frame are not lining up. So on this group, my H alpha group, I'm going to put a layer mask, and then I'm going to select the brush, or you can select the brush by pressing B. I'm going to go with a 40% opacity maybe, and I've got black. And I'm just going to brush over the edges of the frame here so that we're not bringing those stars back in. And I'm actually going to brush around most of the sky and basically anywhere where there's no H alpha data, because this way now we're not darkening the sky too much and we're only bringing in these extra bits of hydrogen alpha data that we got from the H alpha image. So maybe a little bit here because it's getting too dark. So you can see that I've only brought in the H alpha data in the places where I need it, and I'm not darkening the image too much. So I'm just going to do that cloud there because that's getting a bit weird. And so that's without the H alpha, that's with the H alpha. Maybe a little bit too much there. All right, so what we need to do now is create a stamp visible layer. You do that by pressing Control, Alt, Shift, and E, or on a Mac it's Command, Option, Shift, and E. This basically creates a new layer, a new image layer of everything that you could see. The combination of all these layers is then stamped onto this visible layer here. I'm going to press Command A to select all, Command C to copy, and I'm going to come back to my color image. So this is my color image, and I'm going to go into the channels. I'm going to go to the red channel, and then Command V, and that pastes in that hydrogen alpha and red data. And then when I come back, now you can see much better detail in the red hydrogen alpha regions. It just looks amazing. You can see the cat's paw there. Just stunning detail in the hydrogen alpha now. The colors look amazing as well. So what we can also do is come back to the layers panel, create a new layer, Command V again, and bring in that HAR data again. Change the blend mode of this layer to luminosity and reduce the opacity, and that will just help bring out those red bits a little bit more. Maybe a 20% opacity, somewhere around there is good. So just a little extra brightness in bringing out those colors. And then you can use curves on the layer underneath to add some contrast. And adding contrast will automatically saturate this layer as well. It's a consequence of adding contrast, so that will help those colors come out even more. And you can do another curves on the H alpha data, but this curves layer is going to affect everything that's underneath it. So we need to clip it. So hold Option or Alt if you're on a Windows PC, bring the mouse between the two layers till you see that arrow, and then clip it to that layer. So now this curves layer is only affecting that HAR layer. I'm just going to add some contrast to that layer as well. Come back to this curve, see if we can get some more saturation and contrast out of it. Just tease it out, be gentle. And then if you wanted a bit more saturation in the reds, maybe you could come to hue saturation, change the master to the red channel and add some saturation to the reds until you're happy with the amount that's in there. And you can play about with that. You can do the saturation of the yellows if you want the core to be a bit more saturated, something like that. And that's pretty much it. That's the technique I've been using to blend my HA and RGB. So just to show you, so that was the stock image straight out of my Astro Modified Camera, and that's when you add in the HA data, so you can see much more prominence in those red hydrogen alpha emissions, and it also adds a really nice contrast to the Milky Way in general.